Hi everyone, this is Ms. Rogel, and in this video we will be looking at properties of quadrilaterals. Alright, so the way we're going to do this is by using the chart that I handed out in class to you. Let's start right here at the top. The definition of a quadrilateral is a four-sided polygon, and the sum of all the angles are 360 degrees. That should be a pretty simple fact. Alright, so we're going to start by looking at parallelograms. Now there are 5 things that need to be true in order for a quadrilateral to be a parallelogram. The first is that both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. The way we can figure that out, again, is by using the slope. Please, on your paper, write down that the slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Pause the video, make sure you have this written down, and hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. Alright, the second thing that needs to be true is that both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. Remember, we use the distance formula for that. And the distance formula is that the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. Pause the video, make sure you have this written down, and hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. Alright, the third is that opposite angles are congruent. So if I label my parallelogram like so, then I know that angles A and C are congruent. Angle A is congruent to angle C. And I know that angle B is congruent to angle D. Pause the video, write this down, and hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. Alright, the fourth property is that consecutive angle pairs are supplementary. And that means that angle A plus angle D is equal to 180 degrees. We could also do something like angle A and angle B are equal to 180 degrees. And then there's 2 more options. I'd like you to pause the video and figure out, sorry, that would be 1, that would be 2, this would be 3, and this would be 4. I'd like you to figure out what other 2 angle pairs add up to 180 degrees. Ready, pause. The fifth property is that the diagonals bisect each other. So that means that line AC cuts angle BD in half, which means that if I label this point E in the middle, we have AE is congruent to AC. We also have that BE is congruent to BD, and you're right, this should be the congruent symbol. We also can use the midpoint formula, and the midpoint formula looks like this. And that midpoint formula can help us find point E, which is the midpoint. Pause the video, make sure you have all of this information written down in your notebook, and hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. Alright, we're going to now look at rectangles, which are a specific type of parallelogram with 2 additional properties. The first is that at least one angle is a right angle, which means that all angles will be right angles. So if my rectangle is labeled the same way as my parallelogram, I'm going to choose to say that angle C is going to be a right angle. And we can use the perpendicular lines to prove that by saying that the slope of BC, which is this line right here, is the opposite reciprocal of the slope of CD. Now, if they are opposite reciprocals, then I know they are going to create a right angle. Pause the video, write this down, hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. right, the second property of rectangles are that the diagonals are congruent. The diagonals are AC and BD. And the way we can prove this is by the distance formula, that the distance of AC is congruent to the distance of BD. Remember the distance formula, x2 minus x1 plus y2 minus y1. Each of those quantities is going to be squared, and then you take the square root of the whole thing. Now this also means a few more interesting pieces of information. It means that if my midpoint here, let's call it E, it means that AE, DE, BE, and EC are all going to be congruent. Let's write those down. Pause the video, write this down, and hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. All right, now let's look at rhombuses. A rhombus says that at least two consecutive sides are congruent. That means that these two sides, are going to be congruent, or these two sides are going to be congruent. Therefore, all sides are congruent. If I labeled my rhombus in the same way as my parallelogram, this is what I would get. Again, I would use my distance formula to prove that each side has the same length. Pause the video, write this down, and hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. The second property is that the diagonals bisect the angles. So if I draw my diagonals, I know that this angle right here, angle A, B, D, is going to be congruent to this angle right here, angle C, B, D. And this would be true for every diagonal. The third property is that the diagonals are perpendicular bisectors. So again, it means that they're bisectors. They cut each other in half. Not all of them are the same. However, AC cuts BD in half. They're also perpendicular, which means that AC is perpendicular to BD. And if two lines are perpendicular, then their slopes are opposite reciprocals. So again, I would use the formula for slope to make sure that AC and BD are opposite reciprocals. Pause the video, write this down, and hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. The final one is that the diagonals form four congruent right triangles. Those four triangles will be triangles ABE, CBE, AED, and CED. Again, we could prove this by using one of our triangle congruency theorems, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Pause the video, make sure you have this written down, and hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. All right, and the final one we're going to look at today is a square. Now, the square is both a rectangle and a rhombus, so it means it has the properties of a rectangle and a rhombus. And in addition, it has the property that the diagonals form four congruent isosceles right triangles. Let's look at what this means. All right, I have my diagonals, and E is the midpoint inside, and let's just look at one of those triangles, AED. Now we know that the angles on the bottom are going to be congruent. We know that the diagonals bisect each other, and all of them are congruent because of the properties of a rectangle. So those are congruent. Therefore, we have isosceles right triangles. And because every triangle is the same, they are all going to be congruent isosceles right triangles. So let's write that down. All Right, we have triangle ABE is congruent to triangle BEC, which is congruent to triangle CED, which is congruent to triangle DEA. And I just drew the triangles like this to show that they are isosceles, right triangles. So those two angles are isosceles, and the final angle is going to be a right angle. And that comes from the properties of a rhombus. Pause the video, write this down, hit play when you're done. Ready, pause. All right, you're all done. Congratulations on making it through your first flipped classroom video. When you get back to class, we will be doing a lot of proofs and problems using these properties. Please make sure all these notes are somewhere in your notebook. Great job!